Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Jeffers, and I serve as the media coordinator for the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure, also known as AII. Today, I have the honor and privilege to be speaking with the CEO of Before You Dig Australia, Mell Greenall. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am very excited for you to be here and share your perspective with us.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a real thrill to be able to share our international expertise and knowledge and learn from each other. We feel very removed from the rest of the world sometimes here in Australia, being that we're so far away. So I really love being able to connect whenever we can.
I feel the same way being in Montana because for a lot of people in the United States, they don't even know where I am. Um, it's like a landlocked New Zealand. But let's dive right in. My first question for you is, what is your role and what leadership principles guide your decision making as CEO?
Okay, so yeah, my role is CEO of Before You Dig Australia, and I have the real privilege of leading a really passionate team nationally in the areas of damage prevention when working the utility infrastructure here. And I would say my principles for leadership always come from a place of authenticity. So if I wouldn't do or say or lean into what I'm asking others to do, I won't ask them to do it. So it always starts with, do I genuinely believe and connect with what I'm asking the team to do? And I always think, it's just about being yourself. We work in an amazing industry where there is room for everybody. And there's room for every point of view and every new idea that comes to the table. So I think, when I work with my team, I always challenge them around bring their best creative self to work every day. Safety can be a bit dry and a bit boring at the best of times, depending on who you ask. But if we bring a bit of a creative flair and a sense of humor to what we do, it just really, I think, changes the conversation and it changes our position with industry. It makes us relatable. It means we can engage. And it always means that we're challenging the status quo. And I think that's really important in this space.
What ultimately inspired you to get into the world of damage prevention?
Good question. I've been sort of in the construction sector in various forms for the last 10 years of my career, generally in an industry or peak body role. When this position came up, we were in a really interesting space with Before You Dig. So for some of your listeners, we used to be known as Dial Before You Dig, and it was 7 different businesses around the country. So each state had its own business that was managing that damage prevention space. And I was brought in to merge those businesses into a single national entity and to unify the strategy and the voice for damage prevention in Australia. So for me, that was really exciting in itself to be able to create really meaningful and impactful change and be empowered to do so by both the board and industry. And then for me, I think it's just we do such meaningful work. There's very few roles, I think, anywhere in the world where you can genuinely say the work you do every day is ensuring that tens of thousands of people get to go home to their families every day and get to go home to their dog and their friends and their kids. And I think, there's something, so even on the toughest days and even on the days when I want to bang my head on the wall, and don't get me wrong, there are plenty of those days, I think I always come back to the fact that, like, wow, what a privilege, what an honor it is that I get to work across a collective industry of amazing people. And our common goal is just making sure we get people home safe, making sure they get to go home and their internet's connected and they've got hot water and they've got electricity to cook their dinner. I think that's a really privileged position, and that's what motivates me every day and inspires me to do the best I can.
How do you measure VITA's impact on preventing damage and improving safety?
I think it's one of the toughest things because when you're doing things really well and damage is sort of, not happening too extreme, and we're really lucky in Australia, we've never had a really significant catastrophic event or a major fatality incident. So sometimes it can be really hard to measure is what you're doing working. Because I think when we accept that things are working well, we start to get complacent. So that's a real challenge for us around how do we measure what does good look like. Here in Australia, we had never really captured damage data well. So we'd never really worked with industry to capture actually how many incidents were happening every year. And I'm a big advocate that you can't manage what you don't measure. So last year, we did a really significant project to work with industry to create what we've called our damage data dashboard. And it's a living dashboard, it's interactive. And that's now building in momentum. So we know that for 2023, once the full data set is loaded, we'll have seen approximately 20,000 strikes on utility infrastructure nationally. And that's underreported by about 2/3. So we actually think that that's probably closer to representing 60,000 incidents in a given year. So that's giving us a really excellent baseline and now a new narrative to talk to industry and community to say, well, we actually know that the civil construction sector is one of the leading risk profiles for damage. And interestingly, here in Australia, they're almost matched by the homeowner community or the DIY community. And so they're very different challenges in terms to how do we engage them. So civil construction, obviously very regulated here in Australia, very dominated by process and procedure. Homeowners, well, it's, they just want to get that new front fence in, or here in Australia, a new pool or whatever's going on. Different ways of engaging, different safety messaging, different levels of support that we need to get to those two groups to drive damage down. So that's really allowing BIDA to reset our strategy for the next 5 years, which is a project we've just closed off with our board as our new strategy. And that's going to be around, well, how do we position ourselves as an industry-centric safety partner? So that whether or not you are a DIY putting in a new fence or, putting a new garden in the verge, or you're doing major highway works and ripping up kilometres of asphalt so that, we can lay new infrastructure down, how do we engage both of you well, support you where you're at, and really ensure that you're aware of the risks and you know how to mitigate them appropriately for the job that you're doing?
When it comes to engagement, what kind of dilemmas do you face?
Oh, look, I'm sure it's really similar to the US and Canada, where, our demographic that we have to work with is so broad. So it is homeowners, it's civil construction, it's residential builders, it's tradespeople, it's engineers, it's designers, and everybody else in between. And so the language that we have to use is really different based on that demographic, and the imagery that we have to use and the call to action. And sometimes that can be really challenging to get that cut through in a world of white noise and social media where everything's instant and valid, and it's the 30-second TikTok, and I'm a terrible dancer, so you don't want me to do a safety TikTok. It'll be abhorrent. But how do we cut through in that space where that's how we're used to engaging? And so it really is around bringing that creative. It's around having a crack. I really say we just have to fail fast. We have to try a lot of ideas and a lot of different ways of phrasing and messaging things. And if they fail, that's okay. But we have to fail fast, move on, try the next thing, so that we're always moving forward and seeing what resonates with our different target audiences. And I think the other challenge as we move forward is, here in Australia, and I'm sure it's very similar there, we've got very diverse language and cultural groups. And so traditionally, we've always used English as our primary mode of communication. And I think we really need to challenge ourselves to meet people where they're at and recognize, particularly in our construction sector, that English might be third or fourth spoken language. So how do we engage in those primary languages that are be spoken so it actually resonates and connects and it feels meaningful to those groups that we want to take that safety message home? And what are the different imagery that we have to use? So it's exciting. It means there's always something different to do, but I don't think any of us have got it right. And I think we're all looking internationally around what different campaigns are happening. And I think we do things really well, but we can't get complacent. Just because we did it well 2 years ago doesn't mean it's working today. And how do we do it differently for today's audience? And what is that going to look like?
Yeah, and that's where innovation comes in, to continually, build upon what you have. And I think that going back to what you're talking about, the data damage dashboard, that's really cool. What are the emerging trends and technologies like that shaping the future of damage prevention, do you think? And especially thinking about a possible language barrier, technology is able to kind of, bridge that gap.
Yeah, look, I think here in Australia, there's a real drive, particularly from our engineering and construction sector, to move towards digital plan exchange. So here in Australia, our service is a little bit different to the traditional 811, where you call in and you have a locator go out and off you go. Here in Australia, our service actually is the plan exchange. So we provide the utility plans to the end user, plus then all of the safety permitting information and how to engage with the utility. Now, we've always traditionally done that on a old school printout plan. And, what does that look like for a generational change where we want information digitally, we want it interactive, we want to be able to look at it on our phone or our iPad and out we go. So my big challenge here in Australia is how do I move 700 utility owners into a digital environment? And how do we do that safely in a space where we have significant cybersecurity concerns? And what does that look like from a cyber risk, data integrity? How do we create shared base maps, and how do we create a space where we can create interactive plans because we're all coming off the same technology baseline. And that's going to be a 5 to 10-year project. We're not going to get there in 3 months' time. That's a long-term project. But on the more simplistic side of things that we're starting to explore here at Before You Dig is how can we use AI to do the language interpretation in real time so that when they're in our system and looking at plans and that safety information, they can select to see it in their language of choice, the top 5 languages spoken in construction, and leveraging the fact that AI's intelligence in that space has rapidly evolved and the speed and accuracy at which it can interpret is fantastic. So there's some of the things technology-wise we're looking to explore, not only the big long-term horizon, but also our shorter-term goals around what can AI leverage for us that we can't do as a small team, in our skill sets. We need to leverage as much as we can off AI to create really meaningful change in quite quick and rapid succession. We're also exploring around how it could potentially do risk assessments based on the plans to basically give that really quick summary to say there's high risk assets in these 16 utility owners' responses. These are the priorities you should be looking out for, and just really starting to leverage its ability to consume and interpret huge amounts of information in seconds versus us poor old humans that, it might take a good hour or so to interpret, 130 pages of engineering drawings.
Yeah, well, it's amazing what AI can do when you give it, different reports, data, research, and it can take all of it in 5 seconds and give you an idea about what was found. Um, Thank you for answering that question. My fourth is actually, what would you like the public to know?
Oh my gosh, I really wish the public. That's a really challenging question. How do we get the public to really engage with what's below? I think we live in a world where we're so used to everything just turning on. We're so used to just being able to pick up the phone and off we go. I think we forget that there is, critical infrastructure that makes that happen each and every day. Sitting here in Australia, sometimes only 100 mil under the ground. That fiber optic cable that connects all of our communities from regional to city, our water infrastructure, our electricity, our gas infrastructure. It is just below the surface. And so sometimes I think in our eagerness to get jobs done and completed on time and those time and cost pressures, we take for granted that infrastructure is there. And we think sometimes that, if I hit that water pipe, it's just going to be a bit messy. Or if I hit the internet cable, the kids will be without internet for an hour or so. But we forget that internet cable is connecting hospitals. It's connecting the local GP. It's connecting the cafe who relies on that for trade every day and to be able to pay their bills and pay their staff. It's our schools connected. This infrastructure is not just about our home or our individual business. It's what keeps all of our community connected each and every day, and we take it for granted. So I'd really love to, if I had that magic wand, how would I, shape it so that everybody really appreciates that infrastructure and what it allows us to do each and every day in our personal life, in our business life, in our, our social life. We rely on that rusty old pipe that you see sitting in the ground is actually driving so much of what we do every day.
It's amazing how people don't really think about consequences, the way that they should be thinking about the consequences. Last year for our Modern Roots March campaign, I pitched this to my boss and I said, okay, you want to get people to think about infrastructure in a different way? Let's do it. So I did it. I'll send you the link actually, but I did a parody of the morning routine scene from American Psycho. And the entire video, I was obsessing over what was giving me water, what was turning on my lights, what was, heating my pool.
I have this idea of modern roots, some kind of abstraction, but you can't see them, only the surface markings. The electricity powering my lights, phone charger, and computer all comes from buried powered lines. My internet cable is underground as well. Gas from my water heater also crosses under my parking lot. And although they can hide under the cold ground, you can still flip your switches and turn on your faucets or gas. Maybe you can even sense our lifestyles are probably comparable.
What would you like policymakers and decision makers to know?
Oh, goodness. Here in Australia, it's really interesting. So we have both federal and state legislation, and they often don't talk that well to each other. And then on top of that, our infrastructure, depending, our telecommunication is managed federally, but electricity, water, and gas is managed state. And then OH&S is managed then in both state and federal. So it's this really complex of environment of going, well, where is the right policy lever we need to pull for greater protections? And I think as we start to engage in this space with our damage data dashboard, and additionally, we're just doing a piece at the moment on independent economic research around the impact of damages and the cost to community. So we're hoping to publish that research paper in August, which is looking to validate a UK study that was done in 2017. And there's often a statistic bantered around 1 to 29. So for every dollar spent on a utility repair, it's $29 cost to community because of outages, disruption, injury, etc. So we want to validate that for Australia, and we're hoping to get that published, as I said, by August. If that stat holds true for Australia based on our damages and our economic pressures, supply chain issues, we're looking at a $5 billion problem every year in Australia because of the cost of damage. And that's a big number in anyone's language, and no matter which policy minister you are, that's a big number. So how do we work with government to create policy and regulation that doesn't stifle productivity or efficiency, but drives protection and drives better safety outcomes for our community? And that's a challenge. So I think there's multi-policy levers we need to look at here in Australia is how do we protect our infrastructure under the Electricity, Gas and Water Acts and our Federal Telco Act? And then how do we better embed responsibility from a PCBU, which is what we call a business owner here in our legislation, and for individuals to do that empowered risk assessment and to better embed their empowerment to say, hey, this job, I'm not sure that this is safe. We need to slow down here and make sure we've really identified the utilities in this space from a safety perspective. And then there's the infrastructure protection and network integrity challenge around how do we make sure we've got the right policy levers and consequences for if that isn't followed. And so it's a two-side. But I always say to the community in our industry here, policy is only part of the puzzle. We can't rely on regulation to solve the problem because it's only one element of it. And yes, we need it, but it's not going to change the damage data. It's not going to drive or change behaviour on its own. So one of the other challenges we're looking at here in Australia is how do we embed better utility risk management education right from day one with every trade, every skill qualification that digs a hole. And that sounds a bit naff. You're like, oh, well, everybody digs a hole. Well, if that's the case, we all need to know how to understand and mitigate utility risk. And so we're now looking at some projects nationally around how we can support our education framework and standards and training under our vet sector here, which is the sort of our trade and qualifications framework here for Australia. How do we embed those skills right from day one? So the day one of your apprenticeship, you're learning these skills, and then we can continue to refresh that as they progress through their career. Because it's almost like that sort of triangle. You've got your regulation at the top, we need education on this side, and then over here we need just that general awareness and appreciation so that as a general community we appreciate the risk and are really working around utilities safely and understand and don't get complacent. And we know when we stick that shovel in the ground to dig a garden, we're not actually disconnecting our entire community. So I think it's a multi-challenging problem, and I don't think one solution fixes all of it. I think it's one of those wicked problems that we all experience where actually there's going to be 20 solutions that we need to develop concurrently and bring together to see real change. And that can be terrifying sometimes, particularly as a leader. You sit there and you go, how the hell are we going to get all of this done? But I think you just start and you take that step and you know that you're building a legacy or a foundation for change that will outlive me as the leader of BIDA, and it'll probably outlive the next leader of BIDA. But it's one of those problems that will continue to evolve as technology changes, as the renewable environment changes with energy supply, as our learning styles change. Everything is continually changing, so we need to continually change. And I think for our policy advisors, I think we need regulation that is agile and adaptive to that environment of continuous change. Legislation that worked 20 years ago won't work today, and it won't work in 20 years' time. So we need to get into a rhythm of constantly reviewing where industry is at and what do they actually need to work safely and efficiently and ensure that our critical infrastructure is protected.
Yeah, complacency, that's one thing that really shouldn't ever be on the table because you have aging infrastructure. You have to be continually updating things, no matter how many amount of years that is, right? Um, and it's a multifaceted situation.
Yeah.
So, one right answer. I mean, you just said. I'm just repeating what you said. Here's maybe a little fun follow-up question. You have answered this in different capacities, but how would you say you foster a culture of safety and innovation within VITA?
Yeah, look, I think it's one that is close to my heart, actually, because as a leader, and I don't think of myself as a traditional leadership style. I think in this industry, you tend to see, and no offense to anyone out there, but that really traditional patriarchal style leader that is do as I say, it's that push down. Versus, I really take pride in the fact that as our team, we foster it from the ground up. And, I roll my sleeves up and I get my hands dirty alongside my team each and every day. And that brings me such joy to know that, if someone needs to be out there answering the phones, I'm just as happy to jump on the phone as well as do a conference presentation. I can go from a meeting out on site with a toolbox talk with a bunch of construction peers, as well as meet with a minister. I think, being across that business is really important to me so that I have connection to what my team is experiencing each and every day. But I think that culture of change is around, as a leader, we have to make it safe for people to get it wrong. Because we all get it wrong. I get it wrong. When we're not perfect, we are human and mistakes happen. And sometimes the greatest ideas on paper look wonderful, but when you go to implement, oh my God, you go, why the hell did we think that was a great idea? This is terrible. But I think it's around fostering that's actually proof that you're trying. Because if people are getting it wrong and your ideas are failing, it means that you're actually trying new things and you're putting yourself out there and you're willing to be vulnerable to try new things. So I think it's really important as industry and as leaders that we encourage that behavior. We shouldn't punish failure when people are learning from it. And I think that's the big difference, because people go, oh, well, if you're not challenging failure, you're just going to get everything wrong all the time. No. I always put a caveat on it. Failure where it creates learning is powerful and absolutely needed. So I always say to my team, if we get this wrong, it's okay, because we're going to learn from it and we're going to do it so much better next time. But if we're making the same mistake continually and we're not learning and we're not changing our approach and how we think, then there's absolutely a problem. And my board should absolutely be pulling me up and going, Mel, what the hell are you doing? Like, this is lunacy, because it would be. Yeah. So I think that's the difference. I think we've got to lean in and not be afraid of getting things wrong. And we have to realize that nothing is ever going to be perfect. And one of the ethos that I brought into the team from day one is it's all about progress, not perfection, because we will never be perfect. And if we set perfect as our goal, all I am doing is setting myself and my team and my board up to fail each and every day. And that's a horrible environment to work in. Who wants to come to work and know that that's the goal? Versus if we challenge ourselves to make progress, if everything we do is taking either that baby step or that big step or whatever size in between, then we are absolutely succeeding. If we can look back at the end of each year, each quarter, and say, hey, look at what we got done. Like, this is amazing. We changed the dial on this. Even if it's only by 5 degrees, hell, that's still change. And that is fantastic. So I think it's really around that culture of celebrating the fact that we are making change and celebrating the learnings when we fail, and don't hide it. I think as leaders, the worst thing you can do is pretend that you've got it all right and you know all the answers, because I absolutely don't. There are days where I sit there and I'm like, okay, Tim, how are we going to make this work? Because I don't have all the answers. I'm still just one person. But I think it's about, as leadership, being vulnerable to ask for help and show your team that you are willing to do that, to be vulnerable to put your hand up to industry and say, hey, I absolutely agree there's a problem here, but I'm not sure we've quite worked out what the solution's going to be, and we're going to need some time to work this through, and bring industry on that journey with you. Because I think, as we move forward, I think there's a real power in vulnerability. There's a real power in being able to ask for help and actually being authentic in that space. I think, that builds such trust. And as long as you continue to put your hand up and say, hey, I stuffed this up, but you know what? I'm going to work my ass off to get it right, and I'm going to fix it. I think that changes the conversation from this thing about being perfect and everything's got to be 100% right before we try something, to actually an environment of taking educated and intelligent risk. Because we all need to take risks as much as we're in safety, and everybody goes, but safety is about eliminating the risks and it's all going to be great. That's not the case. We actually have to take educated risks to drive innovation and change and to create better outcomes for people to work safely. And we've just got to get comfortable with that. And what does that look like for all of us? So, yeah, so my culture is, yep, we're all going to get it wrong from time to time, but Jesus, we're going to learn from it and we're going to create some really great outcomes from those learnings. So let's just embrace it, and it's progress, not perfection.
Dang right. I absolutely love your approach. It's phenomenal. And that's what anybody should be seeking in an industry leader. And there you are. I think you're totally, you're totally
Right.
in the sense that you don't want to obviously intimidate somebody because, heck, they make a decision that really is a substantial mess up. And then you're not going to foster this sense of, I want to be here and continue to make improvements and share my ideas and help it, continue to move forward. Because yeah, you're right. Progress is better. Moving forward and not being stagnant is so important because stagnance is complacency, and we don't want any of that.
Oh, look, it's scary sometimes. And I think, I still consider myself a baby on my leadership journey. I look around me and I see these amazing people with these outstanding careers and far, far smarter than me. So I think sometimes even as a leader, just to take that moment and go, what, I'm actually really scared. What if I get this wrong? And so I've had to foster that culture in myself first and foremost, and really reinforce it sometimes that it's okay to be scared. And I actually think it's healthy as a leader to be scared sometimes and to be nervous around your approach or your decision making, because I think when you are a little bit frightened, you generally are going to lean in to make sure that, have I challenge tested this? Have I really captured all of the problems before I lean in and say this is the pathway forward? And am I making sure my team is going to be okay through this journey? And I think a little bit of fear is healthy as a leader. And I hope that I never get to a point in my career that I am so comfortable that I'm not challenging myself and I'm not second checking, have I ticked all those boxes before I lean in or make an announcement? Because I think as a leader, you have to be the one that's the most nervous. You should be empowering your team to be the most confident. Well, so you're sitting behind the scenes and actually going, have we fact checked this? And have we made sure we've lent into this? And have we made sure our team is going to be psychologically safe through this process and physically safe as well, and leading them on that space. And I hope that I always carry a little bit of that with me through my journey to really put the people first. And are they going to be okay through this? And have I done everything I can to empower my team to be amazing? Because that's actually my job. It's not my job to create, all of the solutions. It's not my job to write a 1,000-page report every week. It's actually my job to empower my team to be awesome. Yeah. And if I'm doing everything in the background, I can. And if I'm always a little bit worried about, have I done enough? Then I think, I'll always hopefully lean in and make the right decisions.
Thank you, Mel, so much for joining us today and sharing your perspective.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to share my thoughts around, how industry can continue to drive home that safety message. And I always love hearing and learning from other perspectives internationally, because I think we are a global community, no matter if you're in Montana or Melbourne. We're actually all in the same industry. And the more we talk and share and learn, I just think, wow, how amazing and how agile can this industry be as we move forward together.
To learn more about Before You Dig Australia, check out the description below. And to learn more about AII, visit aii.org. See you in the next video.